Does Jesus matter to the weak and disabled? Part 1. Compassion for the sick and dying was rare in Greco-Roman times. Slaves that were no longer able to work due to sickness were just left to die. In times of sickness and plague, Greeks and Romans alike fled the area, deserting their countrymen who could not flee. Roman pagans did practice giving, but it was giving where the recipient would feel obligated to bestow a favor on the giver. The few Roman acts of relief were more or less isolated state activities, dictated more by policy than benevolence. In contrast, the Christians gave to relieve the economic or physical distress of someone without expecting anything in return. They gave voluntarily and in abundance. Words of Jesus recorded by Matthew made a huge impact on the early followers. Let's listen to what Jesus said.
For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me.
This was mind-blowing to the first Christians, but they diligently worked to put Christ's words into practice. Tertullian, one of the early church fathers in North Africa, wrote about the Christians having a common fund. This fund supported widows, the physically disabled, orphans, the sick, and prisoners incarcerated for their faith. This fund provided burials for the poor and sometimes was used for the release of slaves. Christians gave to this fund voluntarily and generously. What the Apostle Paul wrote to the Philippians provided the motive and direction for Christian charity. He wrote this, each of you should look out not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Now you might expect Christians to look out for their own fellow believers, but this was not the case. They looked out for everyone, Christians and pagans alike. They saw every person as one who was valuable because he possessed a soul redeemed by Christ Jesus. And so Christians began to take some of the abandoned children, mainly girls left to die, and raise them in their own homes. Later, in the Middle Ages, orphanages were founded by individual Christians. Monasteries also began caring for children. While there is evidence to show that families took care of their own, there is also much evidence to show that the poorer the society, the more likely the elderly were either killed or left to die. Christians were moved with compassion toward these elderly members of society, and thus began homes for the aged to meet their needs. In doing this, they started a major social institution. During the early years of the Industrial Revolution, around the 1800s, there were many industries needing workers, and so began the widespread exploitation of children. Instead of training them at home and in school, these children were put to work in textile factories, coal mines, and forced to climb into chimneys to clean them out. It was the work of Lord Shaftesbury, spurred on by his Christian compassion, that was finally able to get the British Parliament to pass child labor laws. Today in the Western world, child labor has been outlawed, but it continues to be widespread and common in countries such as China, Thailand, Bangladesh, West Africa, and Mexico. From the beginning, Christians felt that all charity was to be voluntary. Each person needed to decide for themselves whether to give or join a group that helped people in some way. And these early voluntary organizations in the United States became the United Way, the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club, and the Rotary Club. They all existed to provide humanitarian services to local communities, the nation, and even other nations. In our next video, let's look at how a modern state welfare system differs from Christian charity.